Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and welcome to OCAD University, Canada's oldest and largest art, design, and media university. So hello to the virtual audience. We are live streaming this event. My name is Anna Serrano, and I'm the President and Vice Chancellor of OCAD. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of this land upon which we are working and creating, and is now home to many diverse First Nations and Inuit and Métis people. We're so grateful to have the opportunity to gather on this land. So this is a really important day, you know, and I'd actually like to thank in advance the members of our society who have elected to run for office, who have chosen to be with us here today via their various parties to discuss a very, very important part of this election period, which is the role of arts, culture, and creative industries in our society and in Canada. There's been a lot of talk about cultural and economic sovereignty. This is a consequential election that we're having, and we're being reminded over and over again that Canada matters, that Canada is different, and that Canada and whatever we represent in our plurality needs to be protected and also shaped for whatever future scenarios are coming our way. And you can't really have that discussion around economic and cultural sovereignty of our nation without thinking about those people, those industries, those organizations, both for-profit and not-for-profit, who are the foundation of what cultural sovereignty is. Our artists, our designers, our makers, the talent that make up who we are and what we want to be as a country. So, sorry for the seriousness of my tone, but I care very deeply, and everyone here at OCAD University cares very deeply about the issues that are going to be discussed today by these three candidates. I think that it is not something that we ought to think as, kind of a nice to have on the side along with the economy or along with defense or along with our role in the global kind of new multilateral order that's emerging, but it is actually part of that entire calculus. So I haven't read my notes, but you know, some key points. You know, Canada is a major player in the international trade of cultural goods, products, and services. The global creative economy, valued at nearly USD 985 billion, is expected to grow by 40% by 2030. In 2022, Canada's cultural exports reached 24.5 billion, making an 8.6% increase from the previous year. And in this era of economic transformation, our creative capacity, as I already spoke about, is as vital as any physical infrastructure. And in particular, I do want to call out the role of post-secondary education in this project as well, because at OCAD University, we play a one-of-a-kind role in preparing students, aka that talent pipeline, for leading roles across Canada's creative economy. And our graduates contribute over 520 million annually to Ontario's economy alone. And over 80% of our students create or run their own businesses. So these ventures generate intellectual property, jobs, and cultural exports, reinforcing the country's ability to build and retain domestic value in the creative and innovation sectors. So this town hall is a crucial platform for candidates to articulate their plans to support and enhance this vibrant sector, ensuring its continued growth and contribution to Canada's economy and global standing. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. Your presence underscores the importance of these discussions and the collective effort that will be required to champion an arts and cultural sector. So before I invite the Coalition's co-president, Bill Skolnick, to say a few words, I would like to introduce and thank our town hall moderator, Melissa Vincent, a Canadian music journalist and researcher based in Toronto and London. Melissa's work broadly investigates justice-oriented inquiries of intimacy, relationality, and community formation as they relate to technology and culture. She is a PhD researcher at the London School of Economics in the Data, Networks, and Society program. She was an inaugural research fellow at the Collaboratory for Black Poesis at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information, and is a frequent on-air music correspondent for the CBC National, and her work has appeared in Pitchfork, Elle Canada, The Globe and Mail, Billboard, NPR Music, and The Fader. She's also a Prison Prize juror, a SOCAN Songwriting Prize panelist, a member of the Toronto Music Advisory Committee, and the Mayor's Artworks TO External Advisory Committee. So we are super lucky to have her as our moderator today. And without, yes. Now please welcome our partner, the Coalition's co-president, Bill Skolnick.
I'd like to actually thank Anna and OCAD for co-sponsoring co-sponsoring this event. And I'm going to tell you who the CDC is, in case you don't know. The Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions brings together the main English and French professional organizations in Canada's cultural sector. It is made up of more than 50 organizations that collectively represents the interests of more than 350,000 creators, performers, and professionals, 3,000 businesses in the book, film, television, new media, music, performing, and visual arts. The CDCE acts primarily to ensure that cultural goods and services are excluded from trade negotiations and that the diversity of cultural expressions is present in the digital environment. So to put that in perspective, we are almost 2 Prince Edward Islands and about half of what Newfoundland is. So we got our name from actually the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression at UNESCO in 2005. We started long before that, but Canada was the first signatory to that convention, and a lot of it has to do with the efforts on this part. I'm going to talk a little bit, tiny little bit about the candidates, because I have a little bit connection. Karim Bardisi, who's with the Liberal Party of Canada and is running in Tayakon, Parkdale High Park. Notice the new name, honoring our Indigenous background from this country. And my connection is, well, I know Arif because Arif was the sitting MP who was very much involved in the film industry at the beginning of his career. He had a lot of artists live in that riding, and he was the secretary in the Heritage Ministry. And also, most importantly, Kareem, our daughter lives in your riding. So I'm willing to talk to you about that if you want. Norm de Pasquale is with the New Democratic Party, and he also serves as the co-chair for the Ontario Place for All. So, okay, here's my connection. The first year it opened, I was a summer student. I got a job there. Okay, and I still have the lab coat, and I would have worn it in your honor, but it doesn't fit. Oh, by the way, it was an IATSE crew, John Lewis, that I worked for, and I got offered a card at the end of it with the projections local, but I decided to stay in music. And Sandy Crawley, who's with the Green Party. Sandy has been doing this advocacy and fighting for the rights of performers and creators for longer than I have. That's a long time. But he puts his money where his mouth is, and he actually runs for public office, and he's doing that in Hamilton Centre. And I think I should have, Norm is running in Spadina, Fort York, is that right? And Oh, Harbourfront. Oh, okay, great. Oh, Spadina Harbourfront, everything's changed. Okay, Hamilton Center, the same name? Yep. Okay, good. Now, there's an elephant, but it's bigger. Okay. There's an elephant in this room, and it's that the Conservatives aren't present. And that's disappointing, but I'd like to remind everybody that at the very least, the respective Progressive Conservative Party parties provincially have been involved in culture. Are there any actors here or people from Equity or actor? Okay, great. So MTC, the Manitoba Theatre Centre, it thrived and it was supported by the Duff-Roblin government. That's a Conservative government. And it was Harper, Mr. Harper, that his government named MTC Mainstage a historic building. So there's room there. And it would be, and I was a young artist in Alberta, and the Lougheed government was so instrumental in culture taking a role there and being embedded in that province. And the most important thing of all, it was the Conservative government of R.B. Bennett in 1932 that created the Canadian Radio Broadcasting Commission. That's why we have Radio Canada. That's why we have CBC. It was the Conservatives in the midst of the Depression that said, we need to safeguard our culture. So I just wish, if there are any Conservatives here or you know any, that you would recall these achievements, and that's what they are, and join us in the future for these discussions. Because when you engage with performers and creators, when you talk to them, you are talking to the soul of this country. Please remember that. Now, that's it for me. I'm going to turn things over to Melissa and to our debaters, or I guess discussers, rather than, since it's a town hall. Thank you.
Check.
Are we? Just look for the light in the battery indicator.
Hello? Sorry, a little bit hot, but I think maybe now.
I can do without a mic,
But I think maybe now we're the right temperature. How is everyone doing today?
Stay away from the brown acid.
I just want to say hello and welcome everybody for joining us today online and in person. Just a reminder that we will be broadcasting today's conversation. And after a lot of really fantastic introductions, I just am really thrilled to introduce the theme of today's conversation and town hall, Canadian cultural sovereignty, in the context of the federal elections, which, mark your calendars, will take place on April 28th, 2025. A little bit of housekeeping. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our partners, the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions and OCAD University. This will be a 90-minute event, so I'm glad everybody looks comfortable. And while I'm positive our conversation will sprawl in a lot of places, because I think that is the nature and heartbeat of healthy discourse, I want us to kind of focus on some of the following topics: the meaning of cultural sovereignty in the midst of a trade war with the United States, some of the top concerns regarding funding and employment support for the cultural sector, how we should be responding to, and I think critically planning for, the many impacts that artificial intelligence will have on those working in the cultural sector, and the future of the Copyright Act, the Broadcasting Act, and Canada's public broadcaster, CBC Radio Canada. And to note, today's speaking order was determined by random draw with fair distribution for speaking time, to keep in mind for our speakers. And I think with that, I'd love for us to get cooking. I really want to sort of continue what Anna said about the way that we rely on arts and culture to help us imagine, and I think really ignite our dreams for the future. And I think with that, maybe it might be helpful to look back for a moment, and I would really love to hear your memories on a meaningful experience or moment that left an impression on you that really taught you the value and importance of culture in society. And we have 1 minute on the clock. Oh, Kareem,
Thank you, Melissa. So the memory for me is I'm from northern New Brunswick. I'm the child of immigrants, the only person in my family born in Canada. And Theatre New Brunswick. It's a traveling theatre company that really brought the community together. They would perform at Bathurst High School every 6 months or so. I don't remember any particular production, but our community is about 15,000 people. And I remember it being a place that brought, it brought things that were beyond ourselves to us. And then we'd get home, or we'd be driving home, and we'd be listening to CBC radio, usually as it happens, going to the theater, or ideas getting home, and feeling, again, stitched to this broader national conversation. My parents from England and Egypt, and growing up, I felt more Canadian through those two experiences.
Next, we'll go to Norm.
Thank you. I'm Norm DiPasquale. I'm running to be your next MP of Spadina Harbourfront. And, as an activist, I've seen art as an excellent expression of protest. Olivia Chow, OCAD alum Olivia Chow, told me a creative protest is often the best one. And I didn't know that was advice coming from an OCAD grad, but there it was. So as co-chair of Ontario Place for All, the provincial government put a blackboard out in front of all of Ontario Place, blocking the view of it, which we used as a chalkboard. And artists came down and were drawing animals. There were memories of Ontario Place. And it was like a 2-kilometer long chalkboard. And that is art in action for activism. And as chair of No Jets TO, we stopped the jets at the Island Airport, prevented the Bathurst Quay silos from being demolished. And now OCAD is moving in with their climate change and resiliency group. So I see art often as an expression of activism, and I would love to see art all along our waterfront, stitching our beautiful waterfront together.
It's hard to pick one. I was in front of the camera at the age of 2 months, and I think it made an impression on me. My parents were filmmakers, but God bless my mother. She taught me to play the ukulele when I was 8 years old, and she had learned from Bob Ray's dad, actually, when they were at McGill together. So she taught me a little soft chew in the ukulele. And once I learned a few songs on the ukulele, and I realized I could get the attention of a whole room, and then even get people to sing along with me, it changed my life and set the course of my life. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Next up, current tensions between Canada and the United States are impacting the Canadian economy. If an economic recession occurs, Canadians' cultural spending could decrease. Additionally, the 2026 renegotiation of CUSMA, the Canadian, United States, and Mexico Agreement, will reopen discussions on the cultural exemption, a key provision that allows Canada to protect its cultural industries and prevent its cultural goods and services from being subjected to international trade liberalization rules. It is also worth affirming that the dual nature of cultural goods and services, both economic and cultural, cannot be reduced to mere commercial value. In this context, what is your vision for Canada's cultural sovereignty? And we're going to begin with Norm.
Great. There is no Buy Canada without buying Canadian culture as part of the mix. That our very identity and kind of cultural identity and very sovereignty right now are under threat. And what better way to stand up as Canadians by, putting forward our best sort of foot when it comes to Canadian culture and Canadian identity. And I think that's always best expressed through the arts and through cultural events. The NDP have pledged to boost support for Canadian film productions and make sure that art and cultural items are sort of within the Buy Canadian sort of framework. I think that's really important. I've seen things like the CanCon rules on the radio have made all of my favorite bands Canadian. So, putting Canadian options at the forefront for us, I think, is going to be very important as the USA tries to sort of, assert themselves over the next little while and, continue to threaten our sovereignty. We have to put Canada forward, put, Canada art and culture first, and should be completely part of Buy Canada, and make sure that artists are well supported, make sure that everyone is well supported, should job losses occur. We have to make sure that EI is strong enough to pick them up and make sure that they can, move into another line of work. We have to make sure that, almost like a universal basic income, EI has to evolve for our current reality. So yeah, I can't imagine a better time to put Canadian art and culture at the forefront. So that's what Buy Canada means to me.
Next, we'll go to Sandy.
You know, it's interesting. I think that with the current climate in the United States, I'm not sure that the rules that we have set and the set aside for culture is going to survive. We're already subject to what the people around the Green Party cabinet table call techno-feudalism. You know, to say that cultural products are not subject to, have not been commercialized. We've been so colonized by the United States in terms of culture. And we did develop some rather smart ways of avoiding that. I think Graham Spry was right in the first place when he said the states or the United States, the state or the United States. We have to put public money into the public good of our creativity. It's the thing that distinguishes us from other species, in my opinion. But I think that online regulation, if we can elect a government that has the spine to actually stand up and regulate our digital universe, that's going to be absolutely key. Minister Guilbeault tried to start that when he first had the culture portfolio, and he's got it again now. We'll see who the next government is. Despite the kind words that Bill said about Mr. Bennett, and I was going to add Flora MacDonald, who gave us status of the artist, I'm not sure that the Poilievre conservative version of the Conservative Party is going to be able to help us. So I hope that we elect a minority Liberal government, frankly. I think that's because if we have a majority Liberal government, we'll get the same kind of virtue signaling and arrogance that we've seen. So that's my hope for Canadian culture, is that we end up, because we've got a very strong community to advocate for culture. We've got strong organizations, some of whom are in this room, many of whom are online, and they'll continue to advocate well, but we need a government that'll listen to them.
Defending Canadian cultural sovereignty or building it means a full-throated defense of the cultural exemption in the whatever negotiations are happening. I think you've heard that from Mark Carney already. That is ironclad. I don't trust Pierre Poilievre to have that defense. Canadian cultural sovereignty means a plan to invest in and strengthen the CBC to ultimately get to funding that's on a peer with other OECD countries, and to make it statutory. We're seeing what's happening in the States right now when public broadcasting funding is less than secure under law. Canadian cultural sovereignty means channeling the energy that is in this room and taking it out into the national conversation, which is happening right now. I'm very proud to have on my card strengthen the CBC and make our online spaces safer. It's not necessarily a popular thing for a politician to be aggressively promoting cultural investment in this era, where in Toronto, we might feel like we're among peers, but then you go a bit outside Toronto or even at some doors in Toronto, and you're getting the infection, the pollution of tech oligarch billionaire ideas and the Poilievre-Trump playbook that is starting to question and undermine Canadian cultural sovereignty, or giving a very skewed view of what Canadian culture is. So we need to push back on that, think of and develop the economic models that support all the cultural workers, all the cultural leaders who are in this room, in my riding of Taïkon Park Dale High Park. I think there's some folks in here and online who are in the riding. And we also have to push back on this notion that Canadian culture is something monolithic, which again is part of the Conservative playbook, is part of the Trump playbook. In this election, there's a choice between a Liberal government and a Conservative government. And I think with me and with Mark Carney, with Stephen Guilbeault, you have a very strong, very committed articulation of the importance of Canadian cultural sovereignty. Let's channel the energy that's in this room and take it out across the country.
Thank you. Nearly 41% of professionals in creative and art-based fields in Canada are self-employed, compared to the general national average of 12%. At OCAD University, we know that 80% of our alumni go on to run their own companies. This reality underscores the need to adapt public policies, particularly in terms of ensuring that those in the creative sector can sustainably continue to shape their employment on their own terms. If elected, how would your government work to better support sole proprietors and gig economy workers? We'll begin with Sandy.
We need to reform AI to recognize the thing called the gig economy. We haven't got a party that has developed a meaningful response to the reality that we have software developers who are treating people like slaves, and there's no labor standards. The difficulty with the cultural economy is, of course, that labor regulation, labor law is provincial. So we need a federal government that's going to push back at provinces and make sure that self-employed people have the same kind of protections that traditionally employed people have. So I think EI reform is one of the biggest ways. Also, guaranteed annual income. It's the data proves that when you create a floor for people, they will excel, and it certainly works. It would work in the arts. People who work in the cultural sector generally earn. I mean, the median is like 20 grand or something. It's not enough to live on in this day and age. So we have to take other jobs, and we do. But we've got to make portable benefits. We've got to change our labor law and our EI so that people in the creative sector have access to the same kind of safety net that everyone else has. Oh, have I still got 30 seconds to talk about?
You're up.
Well, you know, it is the interface with the creative community and the government is extremely important. We used to have a very strong mechanism. It was called the Canadian Conference of the Arts for about 60, 70, 80 years. At a very low cost to government. We had a good means of two-way communication between the creative sector and the government of the day. We need to reestablish that. There are certain impulses to do so. One of our presenters today, I think, is trying to fill that void. So is the Canadian Arts Coalition. Look into it because you can join that organization and support this movement.
We'll have to let you in on a little behind the scenes because our timer has gone blank. So we're going to all work together.
There's still a working clock. I think we're okay.
There still is a working clock. Next, we'll go to Kareem.
Thanks for the question. I have the privilege of teaching so many creator students at Toronto Metropolitan University, where I run a think tank called the DAIS, which looks at the role of technology in creating or getting in the way of shared prosperity and shared citizenship for Canada. And I have had the privilege of working with OCAD students and other OCAD U students and other students who are entering this economy and some of them some of them have that hustle where they'll do the marketing and they'll find the YouTube channel, and some of them, they just want to create. And they don't necessarily have that desire to be part-time marketing machines, part-time other things. We need a space in our cultural economy. We need a space in public policy that makes room for both kinds of creators. And so what does that mean in reality? Well, it means that there's a role for the public sector in giving funding. And I think a Liberal government has already enhanced funding for a number of important institutions, including the ones that are represented in the coalition. But it also, I think it's going to take a more systematic approach, because again, our cultural sovereignty is really under threat. Our economy, the world economy, is being reshaped, not only by Trump, but by the accelerating effects of technology on our cultural sectors in particular. But again, there's an awakening right now. When I talk to my students, or I talk to people in Tayacon Parkdale High Park about the role of Amazon Prime, Spotify, as places where we are maybe sending our money that are creating more concentrations of wealth and depriving creators, there is now an openness in the people and the population at large to understand this. And so there's this really potentially strong alignment between creators, cultural workers, culture leaders, and the entire population to work on this issue. And that's what you would get from me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, my mind first turns to how can we make life more affordable and viable for artists and make more people want to enter the field. And one of the things that's been a huge success story in Spadina Harbourfront is the artist co-op down at Queens Quay and Bathurst called the Arcadia Co-op. This is a co-op just for artists. And it's the best building to trick or treat with your kids. Every single floor is designed in a different sort of fashion and all equally scary. And at the ground level, they have a performance space as well as an art gallery on top of it. And people have been there. They just celebrated their 35th anniversary. And I spoke to many people who've been there for 35 years. We have to bring the affordable housing to bear. The NDP have a plan to build 3 million affordable houses by 2030, including co-ops, and I think co-ops focused on supporting the arts and culture are part of what make life more affordable. We have another proposal to make the basic personal exemption on your income tax up to $20,000, so your first $20,000 is tax-free, and that supports, I would say, people, artists who are just trying to make it, and can make it more viable for somebody not necessarily earning a giant income in the arts. So I think if we can try to make things more affordable at a baseline, we're starting to get there. And if we adapt Buy Canada to Buy Canada art and culture as well, I think we can get the rest of the way there.
Thank you. Thinking beyond pressing issues of developing a social safety net for arts and culture workers, the cultural sector is facing significant funding challenges. This is reflected in significant changes to grants and financial resources offered by critical cultural institutions like the Canada Council for the Arts, the National Film Board, Telefilm Canada, the Canada Media Fund, as well as various Heritage Canada funds. It goes without saying that these have seismic impacts on various sectors, including music and book publishing, film and theater, as well as museums and many other forms of cultural infrastructure. Please describe how you would support the arts and culture sector in general, and specifically through utilizing various existing funds. And I think maybe to add to that, given the sort of overall climate, how would you describe your response to instances when funding has been allocated to particular cultural institutions and community groups but might feel inadequate? And we will begin with Kareem.
Thanks for the question. I think under previous Liberal governments, you've seen increases in funding for the major institutions, including some of the ones you identified. In this election, because of the threat to the economic order that we're experiencing under Mark Carney's leadership, we've been a bit careful about making a lot of spending commitments, but the CBC spending commitment was a very specific one, $150 million, and a path, statutory funding, and a path towards having funding on a level with other OECD countries for public broadcasting. I think it's a really important commitment, and I know CBC is part of an ecosystem, or generates an ecosystem that helps support the incomes of a lot of cultural workers. I think there's an issue that we have to continue to address around the major or the specifically blessed national cultural organizations, including some of the ones you named, and that people who feel a little less included in those. I think there are a lot of people, there are a lot of creators who would like to access these funding sources, and they're just not as available to them. But we also know that there's some other tools available. So for instance, under the Online Streaming Act, there's a process through which we can divert funding to some of those organizations, and I know there's a CRTC hearing that'll resume shortly after the election. So I think there's a lot of goodwill that has been shown. I think Mark Carney has been very specific that we, as part of defending cultural sovereignty, we do need to make those investments. And as your MP in Parkdale High Park, and as part of the Liberal team, I think you're going to get a real openness to hearing from creators, new creators, to make sure that they feel included. I know that under a Poilievre government, there would be one story about Canadian culture, and it would exclude a lot of people, and that would be part of a story of cuts to cultural funding generally. Under a Carney government, you won't be seeing that.
Norm.
Yeah, I find it personally frustrating how little care is given to Canada's art infrastructure or cultural infrastructure. If you look at the Ontario Science Centre, it had something like $500 million in deferred repairs, which kind of makes for an easy story for a government with another agenda to simply close the place and then we're without a science center for 10 years. So we have to really start caring about our art galleries, our buildings, and maintain them properly. It's just been unfortunately kind of a culture of neglect in this country that needs to reverse. In terms of supporting artists, I would love to see things like the copyright law be updated. The last time we had a levy on CDs and sort of the transfer of music, it was CDs, and it was like 2010. So that stuff needs updating. Our artists need to be compensated for their copyrights. And the same goes for artwork. Like for instance, a First Nations artist might sell a piece of art, and then there might be copies made, and then they only see something from that initial sale and not from future exchanges of that artwork. And I think that that's one way we can at least give like a predictable recurring revenue to our artists and really support them.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. The resale right is something that we're ready for. And private copying, we need to add the word device to the Copyright Act. The Liberal government promised to undo the horrible damage that the Harper government did in 2012 when they lifted a lot of exemptions out of the Copyright Act and almost destroyed the book publishing industry in this country, especially educational publishing. But yes, we need the resale right. We need we need to get on with the reform. The wonderful Julie Derbusen's kind of promised us that, but we didn't get it. It's not a priority. For a lot of politicians, they hear the word copyright, they run screaming the other way because it's complex. It's complex. But copyright is certainly one of the ways that we need to move on that. And the online, as you mentioned, Karim. The business model of the streaming services is deadly for the arts. I mean, it's just horrible. And unfortunately, the CRTC, decided not to regulate the internet a long time ago, and they haven't gotten back to it. The Online Streaming Act has some promise, but can we get it through? Certainly, we need some strong legislative measures, but in terms of just funding, which you brought up, I support, and our party, the Green Party, supports the Canadian Arts Coalition position, which is that 1% of our GDP by the federal government should be devoted to this sector. It's not a lot to ask. Unfortunately, 150 million isn't quite enough for the CBC to get out of the advertising business. We think we can go further than that, the Green Party, and we'll keep reminding you of that should you be lucky enough to form a minority government.
And then I think to sort of continue the thread of that question and maybe take it a little bit further, I would love to hear how you envision shaping and tailoring your approach, specifically to support Black, Indigenous, and other creators of color, along with those from other equity-deserving groups. And we'll begin with Norm.
Thank you. I'm actually wearing a beaded pin from a local Spadina Harbourfront artist, First Nations artist. She's Moneyed 2013 on Instagram. She does great work. I look to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action for some advice on how to approach this. And calls 79 to 83 call for commemoration in each and every one of our cities. And Toronto has taken this forward by building a spirit garden in cooperation with First Nations artists and elders and others. And this is... other municipalities are kind of seeing what Toronto is doing to sort of see if, to move forward with their own. And I think the federal government has a role in helping to fund these commemorative, gardens which sort of commemorate, sort of the reconciliation path that we're walking. So I think that that's a place where the federal government can play a role. And just want to see, as we bring forward art funding, that we, make sure that we are prioritizing racialized groups. And, the Canadians Art Council has put forward, I think, around $100 million per year in funding to First Nations organizations. And I would like to see that focus continue and, help them to build capacity so that they can, launch their own kind of, artist studios and be successful entrepreneurs. So we have a role to help build capacity and help to focus on their works so that, this is part of how we buy Canada again, we buy Canadian art and culture.
Sandy, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Of course, our artistic, our legacy artistic institutions have been guilty of a colonized attitude, along with most of the institutions in our society. I think that the creative community has begun to struggle with this, perhaps too recently, but certainly for the last 5 years or so. And I'm engaged in weekly discussions with a lot of our professional arts service organizations are struggling with this now. And the Canada Council, as you mentioned, is struggling with this now. There's not enough money there to look after everyone. There never will be. There'll always be more people who saying, "Oh, I'm an artist. You give me some money," than we can afford actually as a society to say, "Okay, everybody who wants to be an artist, here's all the money you need." That's not going to happen. But I do think that adjustment is going on with our institutions, with our performers unions. I know it's happening with our all of the professional and certainly community-based arts service organizations are wrestling with this now, and they need help to do it. And in terms of professional arts, they need money to do it.
Canadian cultural sovereignty is it's tightly linked, it's inextricable from the expression of groups and identity groups within Canada, whether it's Black, racialized, Indigenous, gender diverse, other people who have been historically not part of the conversation or have been excluded from the conversation. I've been impressed with some of the things that, I'm a new candidate and Mark Carney's a new leader, but I think one of the strong Trudeau government legacies is the commitment to Indigenous languages and how those investments can roll through and ensure further cultural expression. I think you're seeing with the Online Streaming Act, some moves to allow for funding of some of those specific organizations, Melissa, that you mentioned, that need funding. Again, I mentioned that our funding patterns are still historically skewed to more the larger legacy organizations, and they have a role, but we have to make sure that there's a much more availability of funding that can reach deeply into community. And I'll just maybe put in a plug. This isn't necessarily about any one group, but I know in Taiyakon, Parkdale High Park, we have some places where artists are able to gather. We have there's in the stockyards. There are some artist lofts. There's in the old one of the old Artscape buildings, and so, but we've seen some retreat from funding of some of those organizations. Artscape, as you know, went into bankruptcy. So we need to find the ways to help support groups of creators to come together, to access funds, to access material property, and to access potentially something that can countervail a bit of the domination of the tech billionaires and their platforms. I don't trust Pierre Poilievre to do that, and I think a Liberal government under Mark Carney will do that.
Thank you. So I think we've maybe dipped a toe in, maybe a few. But for this portion of the town hall, I really want to dive into AI and think about it in the context of the increased use of generative AI presents pathways of both promise and tension, marked by turbulence for those engaged. Hello? Thank you. Okay, back in business. For those engaged, okay.
You're good.
Perfect. For those engaged in spaces of arts and culture and other creative industries. There's an uptick in protected works that have been and are actively being used without the knowledge, permission, and appropriate remuneration for rights holders to train the large language models that serve as the backbone of widely used multi-billion-dollar AI products. This approach has been broadly critiqued by the media and cultural sectors and has also been the basis of many lawsuits both internationally and in Canada. From a legal perspective, how would your government ensure protections for creators whose work and livelihoods are impacted by the unauthorized use of AI systems? And to follow that, how do you navigate the balance between fostering innovation and protecting creators? And we'll begin with Norm.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, AI is moving at such a quick pace that's imperative that the government now gets ahead of it. I mean, not ahead of it, but catch up. You know, the European Union has some good laws around AI, which are you know, I think they're setting the standard. But we desperately need to catch up. We have to, you know, the NDP would work with workers, including ACTRA, to ensure any possible benefits are shared and that possible risks are managed. You know, it's unfortunately a time where, and we also need to work with organizations like OpenAI, the government does, to work out some sort of a framework so that artists are fairly compensated for items that are going to AI. I think there was recently like a lawsuit from Toronto Star, and OpenAI had been, you know, taking all of their articles without any sort of permission or consent. So I think it's really urgent for the government to start, you know, begin discussions with these AI companies and figure out a way to remunerate artists whose art is being stolen right in front of our very eyes. You know, that is unacceptable. It's interesting to note that Google Translate was trained by the House of Commons Hansard, because, you know, from 1867 and now, it is the longest, you know, sort of the longest repository of both English and French side to side. So, you know, could we take this and build like maybe some sort of a public AI, like a public domain AI repository, and maybe have a little more control and agency over AI? I think that's something that might be worth investigating, because the public has poured a lot of information into the public sphere, and the public should also benefit.
We'll go to Kareem next.
Again, defending and enhancing Canadian cultural sovereignty means really grappling with this issue. But unlike some of the other issues we've talked about, this one has a complexity and a global element, and Norm referred to some of the features that make any one answer just not satisfactory. You know, I'm dealing, you know, the students I'm working with at TMU, they're sharing their AI-generated creations, even just for class purposes. And there's some exciting potential uses of the technology. But on the other hand, as Norm alluded to, there's this, you know, widespread unauthorized use, and it's unfortunately not just the American global tech giants. Cohere, which is a Canadian company, was recently sued by a coalition of publishers along the same lines as the OpenAI lawsuit. So, you know, we have a lot of work to do to develop and foster public purpose AI, not just for the cultural sector, but more broadly. This is a global conversation. With me as your prospective MP for Tayakon Parkdale High Park, I have a background in this, having worked at the dais and leading a think tank that looks at this, that is very active at both looking at what is the potential for public AI that is genuinely a shared resource. I just came back not so long ago from the Paris AI Action Summit, and you have the public AI people over here, and you have the profiteers over there. And there's a big space in between that I think a Carney government and the kind of leadership that you will see from Mark Carney on a number of issues would be reflective of. And just as a final note, cultural workers are unusually exposed to AI as both things that can enhance their work, but that can displace their work. It's not that simple. Again, a lot of our research at the dais shows that it's a double-edged sword, and we need to be really attentive to and continue to invest in the research and work with creators to understand the exact effects, so we don't try to wipe out the good things that come from this.
I think the CDEC has a very cogent position on this. First of all, we need transparency. We need to know if something has been manipulated through AI. We need to compensate artists who, in all genres, performers, writers, and so on, if their works are going to be used. And in fact, I mean, it's going to be a big legal fight, but they need to be able to say, no, you can't use my work to train your non-human brain. It is a global struggle. It's going to be a global struggle, and I'm really tired of hearing the myth that, oh, if we start to regulate digital technology, there'll be no innovation. Please, I'm so sorry. I'm so tired of that. It's rather tantamount to the Conservative Party saying, oh, well, we can't regulate digital technology because we'll kill free speech. Oh, please. I mean, when the pushback against what Minister Guilbeault tried to accomplish, was really pathetic. So I mean, I hope we don't, succumb to this myth. There are too many people who are going, the bright, shiny object of the innovation, the digital technology, get back to the theater, go to a club, hear some live music, go to a gallery. Don't think that when you see something online. I went to, I was at UNESCO in 1992, when this was just a burgeoning thing. There was a guy there from Microsoft who was saying, "Oh, I live in Minnesota, but my daughter doesn't have to come to Paris to see the Mona Lisa. She can see it online now." Do you remember what a thumbnail looked like online?
Yeah.
I mean, get over it, people. Live. You got to live your art. Don't. Anyway, I think I've said enough. Oh.
Well, now we're sharing, so. In a recent interview with Reuters in Denmark, acclaimed Canadian author Margaret Atwood shared the following sentiments, reflecting on a previous experiment where she reviewed poems and literature that had been written by AI in her signature style. She said, "AI is worrying a lot of people. I'm too old to get worried about this stuff, but if I were 30, I'd be worried," she said, "especially if I were a graphic designer." AI is fundamentally shaping creative work along multi-generational lines. With so many talented and emerging artists gathered with us today, how will you ensure that innovative new technologies benefit and support rather than harm artists working in all disciplines and at all stages of their career? And we'll begin with Kareem.
No, that's a great question. And I mentioned the students I work with earlier, and the closer they get to graduation, the more they experience the role of technology in their art as a potential barrier to future employment. And it's just not acceptable to me to say that this is the world that we've been given, and it's global, and it's concentrated in these in a few companies or a few resources, and maybe I can use it, and the rest are excluded. I'm feeling a real concern from the younger artists who I talk to, or the younger cultural workers. And let's just keep in mind, by the way, if you're an immigrant, if you're from a low-income background, it's a little less popular to choose a life in the arts. There's sacrifices that are already inherent in that, and we need to keep that option available. And so some of it has to do, frankly, with this is not a federal mandate. Anna knows this, I know this from my TMU experience, that the post-secondary systems and the post-secondary institutions have to work with the provinces to be more forward-facing with respect to what the technology is actually doing. Students have to learn on the latest technology, not on a technology that is about to be displaced. We also have to get real with students about which programs are going to lead to which jobs. And if we can't just over-admit students into programs that don't have a job pathway to it. But on the other hand, we have to say there is a space for this. There is a space for you and your work. And again, that goes to this larger articulation of Canadian cultural sovereignty. Mark Carney is very focused on the economic foundations of Canada in the face of this massive disruption from Trump. Cultural production is inherent to that, and I hope to be part of that conversation.
I'm going to hand the mic to Sandy.
Give me the question again. I got distracted, Mark Carney.
I'll do my best to summarize it as succinctly as possible.
Yeah.
What do you think is the best way we can make sure that new AI technologies support artists rather than harm their
So we're still on
livelihoods?
AI. Well, okay. I mean, it's a tough one. You can't you can't stop this technology. Can you regulate it? It really comes down to that. Can we regulate it? And I think we can, but it's going to take an immense amount of political will to do so. And it's got to come from all parties in Parliament if the federal government has anything to do with it. And the CRTC has to stiffen its spine and say, okay, yeah, we can do this, and join with the Europeans, with France, with the Aussies who have kind of led the way in this. And I hope we have the spine to do this, but we need all parties. And I'll get a little partisan for a minute. I think that the purpose of the Green Party is to make sure that the other parties listen to each other and work with each other. And we are not expected to form government. We're not going for the brass ring of power. What we're doing is trying to develop the most forward-looking policies that then the old line parties, and I'm afraid I have to include the NDP in that at this point, will steal and implement. And AI, it's going to take an immense amount of political will, and I don't think any one party can summon that. I think that we need the whole country to get behind it. I'll say.
Two mics now. Why not?
I can choose which one.
I feel somewhat envious. Anyway, AI is a great disruptor. I mean, I work in technology, and I am concerned that my job won't be there in 5 years. So, like anything that is kind of sweeping over, whether it be electricity, technology, the industrial age, there's going to be a great deal of disruption, and it is high time for a universal basic income to make sure that we support those workers as they transition to a new role. So I think that is going to be critically important. Right now I work with AI in my technology company, and AI is kind of hallucinating, sometimes makes up facts, adds extra fingers, as we've all seen. So, but there's going to be a day where those things will be going away, and the disruption is going to be massive, and I could not speak any more in favor of universal basic income. And I think also pivoting back to the Buy Canada has to include buying Canadian art and culture. This is a time for us to put Canada's best foot forward, and I think that comes out through our arts and culture scene. So those are my thoughts there.
It's so funny, all this talk about AI, and yet AI cannot fix technical difficulties when they come up. Our next question. In 2024, Canada's Copyright Act marked its 100th anniversary. According to Carfax, half of visual artists live below the poverty line. Unlike visual artists in over 90 other countries, they do not benefit from resale rights when their works are resold. What would you do to improve support for visual artists? And we'll begin with Kareem.
Yeah, I didn't see any balloons coming down for the 100th anniversary of the act, so I know that I know the last major review was under the Harper government, or the last time there was major reforms, and I think there will be a new House of Commons that will be elected, and I hope. If I'm going to be part of that legislative review, I very much look forward to that, because there are some real issues. The technology is moving, as you know, as you've alluded to in a couple of ways, super fast. We're committed to resale rights as part of any review. I think Minister Guilbeault said that yesterday. So it's very important. This is something that, again, and this is about where the money's going. The money can go to the large players, and in any sector, in any art sector, there is increasing concentration, especially in the visual, as much in the visual and material arts as in some of the other technology-assisted arts. So this is a very important issue for us. Committed to the resale rights, and committed to a very active conversation in the legislative review of the Copyright Act when that comes.
Norm?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the last time the levy was updated was on recordable CDs, CDs that you would copy, it just tells you kind of the urgent need that we have to update that Copyright Act to cover all the digital platforms that have emerged since then. So unfortunately, places like Spotify are not paying artists very much. Like, it just seems like it's all trending downwards, the compensation that people are getting. So it's high time to update those things. And then, when it comes to actual artists, like Canadian First Nations artists have established themselves on the international market, as a unique identity and brand, and it is very rife to being copied without compensation. So between that and like helping to cover senior artists as well, who, seniors whose art has been out there and then massively reproduced without compensation, we can really cover a lot of people by updating the Resale Rights Act and the Copyright Act.
Yeah, just so we understand what the resale right is, we're talking about the physical object of art, and like a painting or a piece of sculpture. And there are I think there are 97 countries that have instituted this, and why haven't we done it? I guess, when you think about a painting, generally speaking, visual arts in particular, plastic arts, increase in value if they're accepted when someone owns them, if they're displayed and so on. It's not about reproducing them, it's about when they're sold again, and somebody pays $10,000 for something that the artist got $250 for, then a percentage of that, a royalty, should come from that $10,000 sale back to the artist to sustain them. That's what the resale right is. In terms of private copying, I agree with you. We just have to put the word device in there, and the collectives in this country are very good at administering this stuff. Collectives for literature, for music, for audiovisual and so on. We have these collectives, they're strong, and they know how to do this. We just have to give them the legislation they need. So let's get on with it. I hope we can.
Thank you. The publishing sector has seen a loss of approximately $200 million in royalties for Canadian authors and publishers since new exemptions to the copyright protection was introduced in 2012. In the music sector, the ongoing refusal to extend the private copying regime to include electronic devices such as tablets and smartphones, a measure adopted in several European countries, continues to deprive rights holders of tens of millions of dollars in compensation. Which I feel like we've kind of been walking around in this conversation so far. So I think I'd like to hear your position on not only what current copyright protections for creators in the book and music sector could look like, but also for you to outline your vision of maybe things that could be brought into the fold that maybe might not have been considered as rigorously. And we'll begin with Norm.
Great. As I mentioned earlier, my favorite bands are Canadian bands, and that is thanks to CanCon rules. We have to make sure, because unless the Canadian band happens to make it big in the USA, the market here is obviously much smaller. So we have to try to bring things to bear to make sure that they're able to make a living out of it, and that includes making sure that Canadian bands are always on the menu when there's any events taking place in Canada. Canada Day has to be exclusively Canadian bands. We have to feature them wherever we are. Some frustration for me around the way that digital books are sold and they're kind of locked down to one place. It's very hard to share a book with a friend and maybe spread word about things. So I think we need to look at those digital rights management laws potentially as well, so that it's easier to spread the word for great Canadian bands and authors.
We'll go to Sandy.
Yeah, I'm leery of that. There's nothing wrong with controlling the number of copies that can go. I mean, we can do that. Let's remember the creators in the first place. And I'm the anti-copyright activists are really dull and stupid in some ways. Everything ends up in the public domain, which is where it should. We need to share. We need to share information. And vital information, and that includes cultural works. But let's let the artists, the creators, the producers, at least be able to sustain a career. Copyright law is not forever. It's changed from times, but it's for 70 years after the death of the creator. So everything's going to be available to you eventually. What's wrong with paying the people who created it in the first place? So I mean, the Harper exemptions in education were just naked vote buying, and of course the post-secondary educational institutions promised that they wouldn't take advantage of it. And of course they did. They drove a truck through it. So, I mean, they almost destroyed the educational book publishing industry and the book publishing industry in general. They almost destroyed the collective, which I sat on the board of for a while. You know, a small Canadian publisher gets a check from Access Copyright for maybe $50,000 or $60,000, and that's what keeps their doors open. So you've got to really look at the real economics of this, and again, respect. We really need strong copyright. How about making the copyright board something stronger than a quasi-judicial body? How about making it mandatory that people have to recognize the value of created works? I'd love to see that.
I think you've heard some interesting perspectives here on copyright already. I just want to take it from another perspective. And again, this is from the perspective of the students who I teach. I've been now teaching at university for 15 years, and I have seen a marked change in students' propensity, interest in paying for content. Let's be clear about that. It's books, music, films, they are paying for streaming services of various kinds that allow them access to everything, and they're paying for in-person experiences. And everything else is being squeezed out. And occasionally, within both of those, creators can make their way. But it's a different kind of creator, and it's not as many creators. So one question I have to all of us is, how are we going to take this moment where we are newly alive to the threats to our cultural sovereignty, and build in the habits, have the conversations, deal with the other cost of living pressures that allow people to, and especially young people, to make them at least open to paying for content, or to develop those other models so that it's not just the large American streamers and the premium in-person experiences or the Patreon models. Again, there are different models out there, but there's a more fundamental problem, a more fundamental issue. We can't just solve by just saying, go and pay for the thing. But we have to address this core issue, that the way people are addressing how they pay for content is changing. Copyright changes alone will not address that.
Wonderful. Local news and media play a singular and crucial role in delivering stories about everyday Canadians that may not receive national attention. On-the-ground reporting reinforces the fabric that keeps a geographically large country connected. What is your vision for the future of media and broadcasting in Canada, including local news? And we'll begin with Sandy.
Yeah, the Green Party this is like our primary cultural plank, maybe, is to strengthen the CBC and free it from advertising, which is going to help the private broadcasters, because they'll then have those advertising dollars that are still spent on traditional television and streaming and so on. But the local news scene, that's another thing. No political party should be telling the CBC how to run its business, but we can help to develop policies and come up with good ideas. And the CBC has to get back into the business of local news in the way that it sacrificed as it was cut back and so on by just not keeping up with funding it sufficiently. An interesting idea, I think, would be also to counter the disinformation that is plaguing our entire society well beyond the arts and culture sector, is if the public broadcaster could establish a platform where there were journalistic standards, and not just their own work, but collecting all of the fact-checked Canadian news and making it available. I mean, when there's a wildfire danger somewhere in interior BC, and people are dependent on Facebook to find out if something's happening, and then Facebook says, "Oh no, we're not going to pay you for that, so we're shutting off no Canadian news." It's really dangerous. It's an actual danger to life and limb. So let us strengthen our public broadcaster in such a way that we can take up that void, and we don't need Mark Zuckerberg to protect ourselves. So that's one thing.
We'll go to Kareem.
My vision for a thriving news ecosystem in Canada, and I think Liberal Party of Canada's vision, is one that has a thriving public sector and a thriving private sector. And so I've already mentioned the commitment to the CBC investments. And again, Pierre Poilievre has been very clear that he will defund the CBC. And so that's a very clear choice in this election. There's a very clear choice in this election between a party that is attending to the private sector role in this. And again, we've had some measures through the Online News Act, to some extent the Online Streaming Act, some of the tax credits that are available to help support people working in the sector, other funds that are supporting real important journalism. And again, that's the Liberal Party of Canada's record. Pierre Poilievre has been very clear that he thinks all of these are political and are in fact partisan. And for some reason, that these funds are in the partisan interests of the Liberal Party of Canada, which couldn't be further from the truth. But at the same time, we have to address that fact that we have audiences are diminishing, and some of these local news outlets are closing. You may know the work of April Lindgren at Toronto Metropolitan University, tracking the number of local news outlets that have closed over the years. The Eganville Leader, there was an article in the Globe and Mail about the pending closure of the Eganville Leader, this renowned, long-time print newspaper in the Ottawa River Valley. You know, I'm a subscriber to the West End Phoenix in the west part of Toronto. There are these local or sectoral news experiments or private sector enterprises that are thriving. The West End Phoenix is one, The Logic is another. We need as many investments, and we need both private and public sector investment and support in this. And as a closing remark, again, this is not a federal role, but there's a really important role for education institutions, educators, teachers, leaders in the community to be pointing people towards credible news content. And that's, again, as part of this cultural moment where we're feeling a bit dominated, this is something that we can do collectively.
Thank you. We absolutely have to save the CBC. Please follow Friends of Canadian Media on their quest to save the CBC. It is of urgent national importance. We have a media landscape where there's lots of consolidation happening. Chorus is kind of teetering on the brink of not existing any longer. We need a strong public broadcaster to put forward Canadian identity and culture. So absolutely, we must do that, and the NDP have absolutely committed to doing that. I was also going to mention the West End Phoenix, which is a newspaper that I love very much, and I go there for lots of speaker series. We had one about standing up to Doug Ford just a few weeks back. We have to protect and fund local journalism, because when you turn to Facebook, of course, they have banned news outlets like those credible ones, but they haven't really banned the ones that aren't credible. So there's lots of really terrible, distorted news on Facebook now, and that's where people are getting and consuming information. So it has never been more critically important to fund the CBC and fund local journalism.
In 2023, the Government of Canada passed the Online Streaming Act, which established the obligation for non-Canadian online companies to contribute to our broadcasting ecosystem through financial contributions and measures to enhance the discoverability of Canadian content. Since then, the CRTC has begun implementing the Act, but few decisions have been published so far. Among those issued is a decision requiring broadcasting companies to allocate a percentage of their revenues to the development of Canadian content. However, this decision is being legally challenged by several affected non-Canadian companies. Do you believe it is important to regulate foreign online companies so that they contribute to the funding and promotion of Canadian content? We'll begin with Kareem.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my response.
Okay.
I mean, Google is making revenue from Toronto Star articles, just to cite one example. So you Google search, you get some news, you're clicking on the Toronto Star news, Google's getting that revenue. Facebook was getting revenue from local newspapers and journalism sources. Why aren't they chipping back in? I mean, to me, it should be a no-brainer for them to support these news sources that they're also profiting off of. But for whatever reason, they're kicking up quite a fuss and, blocking great local journalism like West End Phoenix from being viewable on Instagram and Facebook. It's not right. They make money from us. They should fund us.
Yeah.
Can I build on my yes?
Sure. I mean, and maybe you can build on your yes, and I can add.
Take your time back.
And I can maybe add an asterisk to that, just given the way that, again, we've touched on this in multiple different aspects of our conversation so far, is if you think there is a limit to that regulation, like how you sort of identify and define that line, and how collectively we should be sort of imagining those thresholds.
Yeah, and so this is about Canadian cultural sovereignty, but it's in a global marketplace where we are, less than 3% of the world economy, including and maybe a smaller market for some of these companies, but also at a moment where Canadian cultural and the sense of Canadian cultural and economic sovereignty is having us reevaluate our relationships with the United States. I think there's some opportunities. We referred earlier to the conversation around the global regulation of AI, and I think you're going to see more Canadian alignment with European countries, with Australia, with some of the other allies or peers that are where we can find ways of aligning ourselves around some of their ideas. Canada historically in technology regulation has kind of been the space between the US and Europe, and China is over here. So I suspect that one of the things that will happen, and the research we've done at the dais, I think makes a compelling case for this, that we have to look a bit more at the European models, while also saying and seeing how we can build up, Canadian champion companies can exist globally in this space. We don't really have them at the moment. They're mostly American companies. Spotify, I guess, is Swedish. But so do we have the potential to do that? Absolutely. Is there growing Canadian interest in is there growing global interest in what Canada has to offer from the perspective of technology, from the perspective of cultural production, including diaspora communities? Absolutely. Some of the legacy media brands that still have a global resonance are British, The Economist and the Financial Times. They're innovators in Canada who are looking to build the kinds of products that actually bring in the income that we are currently exporting to Netflix, to Amazon, to Spotify. So I'm also excited by that prospect. But what do we need for that? We need this kind of Canadian cultural sovereignty and awakening and build on this moment. I don't think you're going to see that with Pierre Poilievre. I think with Pierre Poilievre, you're going to see someone who's going to divide, who's going to have a very narrow story around Canadian culture. We have to take a balanced approach with respect to, as you said, how to regulate these platforms in a way that doesn't alienate an audience and doesn't have Canadians reject the regulation. But I think there's a real opportunity here, and this moment is the time to do it.
We are on. Is it okay? Go ahead. We are on the front line. We've been colonized forever by the USA, by the master marketers to the world. To the Marvel movies and everything else that we've never regulated the film distribution for actual movie theaters. We're getting beyond that now. That's an industry that's struggling. We have a leadership role here. I think that you're starting to move in that direction, with what you're saying. We are on the front line, and if we can strengthen our relationships with Asia, with Europe, especially in this particular period with this crazy rogue president who's, pulling us together and making us recognize that we need each other more than we did before. We can lead the way on regulation. As I said, we've got to be extremely bold and brave to challenge them, and I think we'll get support from the rest of the world. But it's going to be a big fight, so get ready for it.
Okay. And to wrap a bow around our conversation so far, we are privileged to be hosting this town hall amongst some of the most talented creative minds and entrepreneurs of tomorrow. How do you plan on ensuring, and what are your primary goals to really think about the fact that they will need to have access to tools, resources, and protections in order to thrive? We'll begin with Norm.
Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, the phrase was build back better. This is a moment to build Canada better. Let's build Canada up, make sure that Canadian artists have all the tools and resources available to succeed in the international market. And yeah, let's be leaders. Let's stand up and show the best that we have to offer. And, it's a time where some countries are taking a step back from that leadership front. Let's take a step forward. Canada has a lot to offer in the art, cultural sector, technology, leadership. There is a lot there, and I think that it's maybe time to be a little less humble and a little more in the forefront.
Sandy?
Yeah, you remember a previous government used to talk about the culture as one of the pillars of our external affairs. We need to get back to that. We used to, our institutions like the Canada Council used to be able to devote more funds to touring, etc. We need to work on exporting our very vibrant culture. Books is one place where, you mentioned Margaret Atwood before. I mean, we actually have novelists in this country that, have dominated the market at times in the English-speaking world. We can do the same thing with other art forms too, but we have to actually consciously go for it and celebrate and elevate our artists who are ready for the world. We are ready for the world, but let's use the public funds and regulation and legislation that we need to make sure that happens.
So I think we've talked about the role of responsible regulation. I think that's key to getting the creators of the future and the cultural leaders of today and tomorrow excited that they can have a career and a life in this sector. So responsible regulation is something that we need to be doing, as we talked about in all these different cultural policy spaces. And again, I think that's something you're going to get from a renewed Liberal Party of Canada and Mark Carney. I don't think you'll get it from Pierre Poilievre. We experienced a bit of the brain drain culturally that we kind of got reminded about when Donald Trump took power and Mike Myers started wearing his T-shirts on Saturday Night Live. But we actually have a real potential to start to attract, in particular, American creators to Canada, in part for some very worrying reasons, because they're American creators or who are really genuinely worried about their rights. In our campaign office, we have the Charter. And the Charter is the guarantee of so much of what it's the guarantee of this conversation today, and it's the guarantee of so much of what we've had the privilege to talk about today. So having a strong rights-oriented culture where people can express themselves with responsible regulation, with that ambition that Norm was talking about, and with that inviting of other people into the country to be the creators of the future, I think is the way to go.
So because we were able to move our conversation along so swiftly, we have a smidge of time for one additional question. This one is from Sarah Diamond, the chair of the Toronto Arts Foundation. Arts and culture bring our cities alive and contribute to social cohesion. However, artists and arts organizations are struggling to find, retain, and afford spaces because of the high cost of development. What programs and collaborations will your party support that can help ensure access to physical spaces for arts and arts organizations? And we'll begin with Sandy.
Well, yeah, Artscape was like a pioneer on this stuff in this city. I know because I was living here at the time, and lived workspaces and all those things. But I don't know that that the federal government can do much about that except by nudging, by supporting programming. We've got to have 3 levels of government working together to really make a difference in terms of space. The other thing, of course, is the guaranteed annual income, which you suggested. I don't know where you're sitting on that yet. Huey Segal seemed to think it was a good idea quite a while ago, Mr. Mulroney's chief of staff. However, the Liberal Party hasn't quite come around to that yet. Maybe it will. But no, you can't, the federal government cannot solve that problem. Thank you, Sarah. That's a great question, and it's a great issue. Municipal governments have to do that. I'm actually working with, there's an amazing example called Arts Commons in Calgary, Alberta, who have brought together all of the professional and community arts groups, the orchestras, the theater companies, and they're working together to build the creative economy in that city. It's a model that I'm going to try and sell to Andrea Horvath in Hamilton. I'm working on that right now. Not as a Green Party person, just as an arts activist. We've got to get levels of government working together to solve that particular problem that that question that Sarah's asking us. And there is a role for the federal government to do that. So let's hope it happens.
We'll go to Kareem.
One of probably the most significant campaign commitment that Prime Minister Carney has made and that our party has made is around a project called Build Canada Homes, to have the most ambitious home building program in Canada since the Second World War, with a projected target of 500,000 new homes a year. So under that, in me and in some of the other arts and culture champions in our caucus, you will have a champion for the kinds of options within that program, because it has the federal government getting back into developing housing and working with other private and public developers to get housing done, as well as to use federal lands as resources, which we've already done some of, but this is really supercharging that. With me, you'll have someone who will be a strong advocate for the potential for arts and culture creators, cultural workers, live workspaces to be included in a program like that. Also in that Build Canada Homes commitment, again, the most ambitious housing commitment by a federal government since the Second World War, also involves a commitment to prefab housing and other forms of housing that I think can be of a special interest to creators. This is deeply important to me in my riding, to the creators who live in Townhall, Parkdale, High Park, and it's part of that kind of underlying support. If we're going to have Canadian cultural sovereignty, we need the kinds of spaces that artists and cultural workers, including those on lower incomes, can find viable for their work. We had some of those spaces. We have lost some of them. We need to build them back and make more of them available. I believe the Build Canada Homes program could be a way to do that in a very meaningful way at Townhall, Parkdale, High Park, and across Toronto, Ontario, and Canada.
But are you personally committed to this new administrative body that's going to be created to replace the CMHC? Is that what we need? Is that how we need to do it? Because I think that's going to be a waste of money.
CMHC will still have a role, but this is a new body, yeah.
Norm?
Yeah, I was similarly going to touch on housing as well. I was just mentioning the Arcadia Co-op down at Queens Quay in Bathurst. Fabulous artist co-op. Artists have been there for 35 years. Art gallery inside the co-op and event space inside the co-op as well. We have to build public housing, co-op housing, housing working through nonprofit land trusts and things like that, and build the places where artists can thrive. Another thing the NDP is calling for is allowing for more gentle density in all of the streets in Toronto, and in this way we can start to build some, let's say 4 to 6 story artist buildings where that can be affordable for artists. If everybody takes a little gentle density, this is one clear way we can solve the housing crisis. Another idea I heard floated in the West End Phoenix was just to encourage, maybe it's a website or maybe some other format where artists can list their space and really start sharing the available space in Toronto, because some places have a lot of space and not enough programming, and then others it's vice versa. I think there's an opportunity for more collaboration to share space. Another thing I saw City of Toronto do is there was a S'il vous plaît Sports on Queen Street, which closed down, and right now it's a studio for racialized artists to have performances and other event spaces called It's Okay. And it's a great use of a space that's going to eventually turn into something else, but in the interim can be used for artists.
I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for gathering with us today. I feel like you can give a little round of applause. I think there's something so crucial about a conversation like this happening in a space of post-secondary education where there is knowledge and information being shared that you might not have access to otherwise. And I feel like that spirit certainly felt alive on this town hall conversation. And I just, again, want to thank all of the speakers for really thinking out loud in a capacious and full and really heartfelt way. It has been hard to bite my tongue because I want to follow up and ask more and jump in, but hopefully those conversations can continue and we can really feel like we can carry the sort of rhythmic quality that happens when we create spaces to think about arts and culture more broadly into the spaces we inhabit and settle in. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to everybody.